The Corporative State by Joaquin Azpiazu, S.J. Chapter 2. The Bases of Corporative Society. Social Classes. Theories of Sauer and Haider. It is difficult to fix the idea and the evolution of the social classes, and this fact is certainly not because there has been a lack of writing about it, but because, in order to summarize it briefly and in accordance with the true history of the evolution of class, without any admixture of laws conforming more or less with the subjectivity of the sociologists and more or less at odds with reality, it is difficult and unfortunate. Estates, political parties, and professional classes constitute the category immediately below the superior royal communities, town, city, nation. The estates correspond to the town, the political parties to the state, the professional classes to the nation, conditioned by cultural circumstances. In the first group, the decisive element is origin and ethnic lineage. In the second, power and form. In the third, finally, value and content. W. Sauer, Filosofia Jurídica y Social, translated into Spanish by Luis Legas, 1933, page 173. It would be better, according to Haider, dispensing with the ethnic element, to call estates that group of human beings among whom there is equality or similarity of conventions and who commonly marry and earn a wage. Classes, according to Sauer, are something more professional, but the same thing has happened to the idea of class as to that of estate, which little by little moved from its central idea toward a quite different idea of classes. Since professions were different, and as some were remunerative and others were not, the purely professional classes were transmuted into others in which the chief sign of distinction was wealth or comfort combined with nobility. Hence, in the building up of professional classes, 5 factors must be distinguished. 1. Origin. 2. Power and distant ownership. 3. Ownership and profit. 4. Intellectual development. 5. Professional labor. Sauer. This does not mean that classes became fixed by some determining factor, but that a weighty combination of all these elements, in greater or lesser degree, Ludwig Haider, Politica Sociale, page 13, came to distinguish 5 different classes with the following characteristics. 1. Agriculturalists, soldiers, origin, nature, force, domination. 2. Important public officials, power, hierarchy, order, form. 3. Merchants and industrialists, ownership, profit. 4. Teachers, priests, artists, investigators, members of liberal professions, teaching, unrestrained organization. 5. Laborers, employees, unimportant public officials, professional labor. In the development of classes, 2 economic social facts have had a very great influence and have at the same time visibly influenced the development of social life. These facts are property and the division of labor, the influence of which through the centuries is obvious in the composition of classes. The crafts. In the Middle Ages, the crafts sprang up as a stabilized and directive social class. The first guilds appear in Paris in the 13th century. They stand out as institutions packed with wise regulations in the bylaws of Etienne de Boileau. In their rapid development, the guilds and craftsmen set the standard for medieval economics. The craftsman holds in his own hand both capital and labor. He is the small capitalist who works in his own shop with a few journeymen and apprentices whom he shelters in his own home, transmitting and fulfilling the wise precepts and Christian obligations of masters in hierarchical society. Craftsmen are then a strong middle class, both capital and labor, perfectly united in guilds and trade unions, divided into regions and cities. These divisions extend even into streets within these same cities. Witness the names which are still preserved: Cobbler's Lane, Tinker's Row, Cutler's Row, and the like, reminders of the old guilds that were established there. On the other hand, economics, not yet mechanized and operating on a small scale, favored the craftsmen who for 5 long centuries dominated the economic scene and, because of the happy union of capital and labor in the same hands, prevented any struggle from arising between these 2 irreconcilable foes. Some abuses in the guilds themselves, together with the development of individualism, the evolution of economics, and the invention of machinery, destroyed the guilds and to a large extent craftsmanship. The proletariat. The proletariat is descended from the crafts. In the economic system called capitalism, or the machine age, which began with the invention of spinning machinery at the end of the 18th century, there begins in England to spread later to the continent the factory system, which had been previously unknown. Inventions, especially the invention of steam power, will henceforth determine how this power will be used in the huge machines that are being invented in every field, and the factory, previously unknown, appears. To build up and gather the enormous capital required for these machines, law invents the stock company, and now capital and labor are separated. The former is concentrated in the stock company. The latter has to develop skills, being without money, and hire out its labor power. The craftsman, on the other hand, is in a small shop and is unable to compete with the factory system, which enormously increases production with its machinery and cheapens everything. Because the system of economic liberty is in force, the craftsman, finding he has no protection from the old guilds or from the state, is obliged to close his small shop and take orders from the owner of the factory as a simple workman. The proletariat has been born. So-called economic progress, a system of large-scale machinery and large capital, has increased competition even between factories. Logically, although wickedly, economic freedom and competition have brought as their fruits a real economic dictatorship. Greater and greater division between capital and labor has brought likewise greater and greater concentration of capital into the hands of a few, and has caused the world to divide into two classes, one a class of a few very wealthy men, and the other of a huge number of very poor men. Capitalism and labor. It is difficult to give an exact idea of what capitalism is. Capitalism in general is the prevailing economic system in which capital exercises a preponderant function over labor. Since, in view of economic development, capital, as Toniolo has exactly remarked, has continued to gain greater and greater preponderance, we find today that capital has a marked influence over all other elements of production, and especially over labor. In the beginning, unquestionably, this was not so. Capital did not exist. Labor, which came first, created it by degrees. This it did first in the shape of axes and stone implements, later of iron implements, then slowly in the building period, and finally in the introduction of modern machinery, means of transportation, exchange, credit, and so on, so that capital is the child born of a father whom he has little by little supplanted in importance, at least in regard to size. Thus, present-day capitalism may be properly regarded as a system in which the capital, particularly large capital, exercises effective preeminence over labor. In the first place, preeminence in management because, as a general rule, labor from highest to lowest is subject to the influence and the power of capital. In the second place, preeminence in profits. And in the third place, preeminence in the very juridical system of our present-day society, which favors the rules and the structure of capital itself. Defining capitalism as a system in which capital has had command over labor, capitalism has always existed except in the earliest days of humanity. But if we assume capitalism to be a system in which this capital has an enormous preponderance over labor, then capitalism is a modern phenomenon. As the principal characteristics of capitalism, those writers who have discussed the problem, most particularly the German Pohle, see also K. Deal, Theoretische Nationalökonomie, indicate the following three: a predominance of the individualistic juridical principle in economic life, a system productive of profits, a structure productive of big business. With these three characteristics, modern capitalistic economy, revealed in its system of law, its profits, and its structure, which is productive of big business, is clearly defined. Of the historians of capitalism, none perhaps is more outstanding than the German Werner Sombart. According to him, the capitalistic economic system is of three types. The first is the economic intent, determined by a dominant principle, which is the desire for gain. Together with this principle of a desire for gain, there appears in capitalist economy the principle of competition, which, as is to be assumed, requires a fighting urge and is pitiless and inflexible in its conduct. Accompanying this principle of competition is the onerous characteristic of loan and counterloan, according to the principle of do ut des. Linked also with profit and competition, there appears, according to Sombart, the principle of economic rationalism, with which capitalistic organizations are saturated. This rationalism appears in the capitalistic organization in three ways: as a systematization of the economic principle, as a manifestation of efficiency in its state meaning, as controlled by exact computations and measurements. As a second characteristic of modern capitalism, Sombart studies the structure of the system itself. Within it, he considers first the very wide freedom of economic arrangement, which is fundamentally free and, in a sense, aristocratic. That is, it is limited to a small number of economic individuals, small as compared to the total number of persons who share in economic life. The third characteristic of capitalism concerns the technique of the system, which, for Sombart, is scientific, revolutionary, and inorganic. Confronting capitalism, we find labor. Little by little, capital has proletarianized man while destroying craftsmanship, especially during the 19th century, and brought about large-scale production. The appearance of big business has slowly done away with craftsmanship through ruthless and inflexible competition carried on through large factories. These destroy the labor of the crafts and change those who work in them into proletarians controlled by that capital. Accordingly, the proletariat is recruited, first from the excess population, that is, from those elements which, having first been independent producers, can no longer be so because they have been violently expelled from industry by ruthless competition. The proletariat is recruited likewise from the floating population, which, since it cannot be independently productive, has to depend upon another already existing production organized into a capitalistic system. Therefore, the proletariat generally appears in industrial life clustered around big business. The formation of the proletarian mass has brought on the problem of their rehabilitation. In the industrial world, not only economically, but in a sense politically and jurisdictionally, the worker has been ill-treated. When conscious of his own dignity and knowing that through union he could maintain his fighting strength against capitalism, he realized amends were due him. He hastened to demand them. For this purpose, he has organized several instruments, the principal one being the formation of unions. From it, the others derive. For the worker, the unions have been a force by which, put at the service of his needs and desires, he has demanded from capitalism every reform he thought necessary. In origin, these unions were professional and unquestionably continue to be professional. But frequently, influenced by ideas that were not really professional, they have invaded politics or the religious field. It is not easy to define the spirit of the workers' unions in general. Each nation in every period has had its own particular brand. This diversity of spirit in nation and in time has been maintained on the whole by the leaders who have influenced them. To decide on the justice or injustice of the means employed by the unions is not easy. We need to study the circumstances in each situation and in each case in order to determine exactly when there is justice and when there is not in the attainment of rehabilitation of the workers. The liberal system and the corporative system in the division of classes. The division of classes in the liberal system of production and system of law is a division that may be called horizontal, rich, middle class, and poor. The division turns on an axis, money, which often brings in another, namely power, the abusive offspring of money. According to these elements, classes are capitalist or proletarian. The corporative system bases the division of classes on another and nobler element, the profession. In the first place, this is not peculiar to a privileged few, and in the second place, it is a necessary element in life in which the social law of work becomes specialized and limited through the exercise of the professional life. Years ago, the Flemish writer Overberg had proposed in his work The Social Classes that the present-day horizontal division could not be to the interest of society. The chief reason was that to differentiate the classes by means of money was the equivalent of maintaining an absolute divorce between capital and labor. On the contrary, he maintained, if the class division were vertical instead of horizontal so that there could be included within one class or estate all of those exercising the same profession, poor or rich, manual workers or intellectuals, the result would be, even if capital and labor continued dissociated, to bring a unity of social purposes that would favor the solution of their great common problems. They would, however, not be dissociated since they would be united in common purposes and interests, and social life would have more unity and be more closely linked, and the harshness of the social problem would be softened since the corporation, the union of all individuals in a single profession, would bring this unity. The scholarly Spanish engineer Leopoldo Barcena, in his pamphlet In Defense of Our National Economy, when brought face to face with this same problem of the present division into classes, gives a division into classes by professions. Professional classes in corporative society. If, as many sociologists say nowadays, the social problem is the problem of the just relationship among classes and estates and with the public authorities, El Haida, there is nothing better for solving it than the prior ordering of these estates and classes so that, with their own houses set in order, they may the more easily be coordinated with the affairs of the nation. The liberal system in economy claimed nothing like this, but rather maintained the inorganic classes based on money. It is then justifiable that another system, desirous of reforming society, shall appear and create a more perfect, more equitable division of classes, one based on profession, set vertically within it, with blended common interests, which will link capital and labor. And if not, in the same hands, then at least within the same body corporate, joined to the state through its participation in public life in order that it may the better direct its own affairs and advancement. The terminology and participation of the word class in the corporative system is somewhat difficult to explain and simplify, and yet such explanation is necessary. In the first place, because we wish to discuss corporative organization according to classes and professions. Secondly, we wish to remove from the idea of class all thought of struggle which at present is contained in it. A. Theory of Ottmar Spahn. In order to define the idea of class or profession, the very basis of the corporative system, Spahn starts with the following ideas. Any spiritual content, even though it represents opposing parties, forms one whole. Ottmar Spahn, Der wahre Staat. Any spiritual content in harmonious or conflicting communities creates a characteristic something, and they are then members of a more exalted totality. Therefore, according to Spahn, the idea of class contains three characteristic conditions. First, it is the expression of a totality. Secondly, it is the expression of a totality in something particular. Thirdly, it is correlated with other classes. Society must be made up of many classes, but a distorted division of them may imperil the unity of the whole. Class has several characteristics. 1. It supposes fellowship according to the idea that among friends everything is common. 2. It supposes self-determination. 3. It supposes that the mutual relation between classes is not a relation between individuals. 4. That the relationship of the class with the state is uplifting and not competition. 5. It supposes the possibility of greater tranquility and peace. 6. It supposes equality and liberty. 7. It supposes decentralization instead of centralization. At the same time, Spahn thinks that economic classes, that is, producing professional classes with regard to property, would maintain in their formal appearance the principle of private property. But in reality, this property would be collective, since private property would at times have the unmistakable stamp of domain on account of the influence of social adjustments. At other times, it would assume the form of domain in the technical juridical sense. And again, on occasion, there would be room for collective property. As for the producing professional classes, Spahn believes that their structure would result in a greater uplifting of labor and a rebirth of manual labor. B. Theory of Walter Heinrich. Like Ottmar Spahn, Heinrich is a universalist. For him, class is a body of appropriate activities within society, a body that interweaves in a community of spiritual and economic activities of its members, which tends toward a complete personal and real organization, as well as toward an educational and harmonious structure, a body integrated by a layer of individuals of similar condition and manner of life. More briefly, class is a community of services based upon a community of life. Walter Heinrich, Das Ständewesen, Jena, 1932. C. Theory of Benno Karpelus. Professional grouping, says Karpelus, has nothing to do with class as this word is commonly used, and the reason is that it is not based on privileges, nobility, money, and the like, but on the profession. For class always contains some notion of class struggle on which it is based, whereas the professional grouping is instituted precisely for the mutual collaboration of the groups among themselves. Class consciousness, he says, kills and strangles the idea and consciousness of professional grouping. Benno Karpelus, Klassenkampf, Faschismus und Standesparlament, Vienna, 1933. D. Theory of Gustav Gundlach. The professor of economics of the University of Frankfurt establishes, in a simple manner, the division of class and professional grouping, and believes that class is determined by something outside of itself, nobility, money, and the like, whereas professional grouping is determined by something internal, or by its vital function, by the exercise of the profession. Therefore, more stability is found in the professional grouping than in the social class in the present-day meaning. G. Gundlach, Stand und Ständewesen. In general, all writers find some difficulty in defining the word class and the idea of class. Thus, the famous commentator of the encyclical, Otto von Nell-Breuning, Luckmeyer, and others, they realize that the best way of avoiding the equivocation is to call those classes which, organized around a profession, will form the basis for the corporative system, professional classes. Conclusions. Evidently, Gundlach's definition and terminology are the most exact, since the professional criterion is the one which must divide the groups in the corporative system. The reader will, of course, realize that many of Spann's ideas are influenced by his false concept of society, previously rejected. From the point of view of the corporative system, the idea of professional class appears, therefore, not as a synonym of class in its current meaning, but in the meaning of special class, classified not by money or titles of nobility, but by the vital professional function. According to the foregoing, corporative classes will be either economic or non-economic. The first will comprise those groups that have relation to the productive order, working classes, company managers, engineers, etc. The second will comprise those that are not directly productive, doctors, teachers, etc., but are necessary for the system and the future of society. Likewise, the division of professional classes, granting the factor of the profession to be as an internal and essential classifying factor in the life of man considered socially, will be much more Christian than the prevailing one. This is true because, as the division was typified either by hereditary nobility or by money acquired possibly by chance, it put only an external pagan stamp upon man, whose merits should indeed appear in his works.